Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom. Today, the 17th day of the month of Menachem Av of the year 5782, corresponding to the 14th of August of the year 2022. And today I've chosen the very preposterous title of Einstein and Kabbalah, about each of which I know very little indeed, just a mere smattering. And if I know anything about a few basic concepts of the Kabbalah, I can assure you I know far less about Albert Einstein or theoretical physics or even basic physics, which I ceased to be studying in junior high school in Great Britain, St. Malvern Grammar School, at the age of 15 years old after my O-levels. And so with that introduction to this title, what I hope to do today is not to enter into any kind of discussion about theoretical physics, which again I assure you I know nothing about, but rather to take some quotations which were posted on my Facebook feed a few weeks ago, which caught my attention, quotations from Albert Einstein, who was indeed a legend both in his lifetime and until today, where his very name, Einstein, is synonymous with genius. And Albert Einstein was born in the end of the 1870s in Germany, but very early on realized that Germany was not his homeland at all, and he moved to Switzerland, renounced his German citizenship, attained Swiss citizenship, and was working in the patent office of Switzerland at the time that he was developing his astounding theories, which caught the attention of the world, particularly after the year 1905, when he published 4 major papers that completely changed the way that people looked at physics. Albert Einstein was a tremendous humanist, I would say, if that is the appropriate word to describe him. He loved humanity. He had tremendous awe of a true scientist, awe before the greatness and profundity of nature. And he was also a tremendous lover of Israel, the people, his people, with whom he identified, even though he had precious little, specifically Jewish religious background. But he also identified with the land of Israel. And long before the establishment of the State of Israel in the mid-1920s, when the Hebrew University was being established on Har HaTzofim, Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, one of the founding fathers was Albert Einstein. And with the rise of the Nazis to power in Germany, Einstein, who previously, despite his Swiss residency, had been visiting Germany regularly and lecturing in universities, immediately realized that there was no future for him or for the Jews in Germany. And he went westwards to the United States, where he found his refuge and became a hero until his death in 1955. After the establishment of the State of Israel, the presidency of the State of Israel was offered to Albert Einstein as a mark of recognition as his contribution as a Jew to humanity. However, as one who was averse to all kinds of personal honor and was not excited by honor, and for other reasons known to himself, he declined to accept the presidency of the State of Israel. So with that little introduction to Albert Einstein and his history, his personal history, let us turn to the subject in hand, and let us start by taking a look at some of these quotations which were posted on my Facebook feed, as I mentioned, and I've actually changed the order in which they were posted. I selected and changed a bit in order to give some continuity to the points that I would like to raise. So starting now with the first quotation, one thing I've learned in a long life, that all our science measured against reality is primitive and childlike. A very tremendously humble statement by a scientist. He says, we still do not know 1/1000th of 1% of what nature has revealed to us. It is entirely possible that behind the perception of our senses, worlds are hidden of which we are unaware. That certainly could be said to be a very much in line with the Kabbalah teaching that one stands before this amazing creation in awe at its depth and its profundity, its endless variety and its mysteries, haunting mysteries, so awesome, this creation. And here we have the words of a true humble scientist, unlike the pseudo-scientists of our time who are claiming complete dogmatic authority over the theories they are spinning. Albert Einstein had this true humility. And as he goes on to say, he admits, I did not arrive at my understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe through my rational mind. He says, I think 99 times and find nothing. I stop thinking, swim in silence, and the truth comes to me. Well, there again, this is very much in line with Kabbalistic thinking that wisdom and understanding are gifts from above. And it is up to us to labor, but eventually the understanding comes to us as a gift from above. In Kabbalah, there is the concept of the difference between the lights that are interior to us, that is to say, understandings that we have attained, we have a grasp of, as opposed to the makifim, the encompassing lights, which are beyond our understanding. And Rabbi Nachman, who is standing in the tradition of the Kabbalistic sages, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov tells us that the whole journey of Israelite is to ascend from level to level, where the person is constantly on a level of what is revealed to him or her, but there is a level that is concealed, the encompassing level beyond, and that the whole goal is to turn what is encompassing into interior, to draw down through our exertions in study and prayer and performance of the commandments until the gift is the revelation of that higher level, the level of the makif, the encompassing level. And so here Albert Einstein is telling us that after all this work of 99 times of thinking, it's like similarly compared to a student in the yeshiva who is trying to crack an extremely difficult apparent contradiction between two of the Talmudic commentators, and is working and finally leaves it, closes the Talmud and goes off and has a shower, and suddenly in the middle comes the idea into the person's head. I've heard rabbis tell me how their sermons came to them while they were actually in the shower. I'm not sure that's the entirely most proper way to derive one's spiritual inspiration. What happens to me is that I'm working on my prayers or devotions, but my mind is straying, and in the midst of all these strange thoughts actually come all kinds of solutions to the things I've been trying to seek clarity on. So again, the saying of Einstein that he thinks 99 times and finds nothing, but when he stops thinking and swims in silence, and here the concept of silence is very important Kabbalistically, because the concept of silence, shtika, is known from our sages in Pirkei Avot. Shtika, silence, is the geder of Chokhmah, the boundary of Chokhmah. When we are willing to stand in awe and silence before what is before our eyes, we are begin to become open to the higher understanding that God will give us with. It says here, Einstein, that the intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. There comes a leap in consciousness. Call it intuition or what you will. The solution comes to you and you don't know how or why. Well, here, Kabbalistically, there's a very important concept, and that is that all true inspiration, all true knowledge is part of the creation that is coming down from God Almighty. There's a conversation, words of Rabbi Nachman in the work, The Wisdom of Rabbi Nachman, where he says that all thoughts and all ideas come from on high, including scientific discoveries. That is to say, this is an aspect of the way that God runs the world providentially. It's not only a matter of earthquakes and storms and weather fluctuations, but also of ideas that are opened up to the people in this world coming down from the source of their souls in the upper world, being channeled down in the merit of their work and their labors, or sometimes through a Ruach HaKodesh, through a Holy Spirit. And so Einstein perhaps could have put this in more Kabbalistic terms had he been familiar with the terminology of the Kabbalah and of Chassidut, that it's not the intellect so much that is important as the leap in consciousness. This leap in consciousness, Kabbalistically, would be called hasaga, an attainment. Sometimes it is on the level of mate, velo mate, of reaching but not reaching. There's a flickering understanding. And again, the goal of devotion, Kabbalistically and in Hasidus, is to work on purifying our minds, our feelings, our words, our thoughts, our deeds, in order to be open to the inspiration of Holy Spirit coming from above, Ruach HaKodesh being drawn down through the levels of our souls into this world. So there's not something you can control, because we cannot control the Almighty. Inspiration and new understandings are His gift. But when we do our part through the simple performance of the commandments of kindness and charity and Shabbat and festivals, the purity of our food, the purity of our behaviors, our moral behavior, etc., we are making a vessel for the higher spirit, the higher understanding, the high intelligence to come down into us. And interestingly, Einstein in the next quote tells us that the more I learn of physics, the more I'm drawn to metaphysics. Well, indeed, I think for reasons that we will touch upon presently, it's clear that as soon as you go deeper and deeper from the little smattering I've seen of physics, that if you really want to understand the nature of creation, you cannot but go to what he calls metaphysics, but what I would call the wisdom of the Kabbalah, which is the higher wisdom of how the created realms within the finite universe are drawn down yesh me'ayin, being out of nothingness from Ein Sof, from the infinite. And here, with humility, and thank you again, Albert Einstein, the ancients knew something that we seem to have forgotten. I think this is part of our general intellectual crisis today, that there is now a rejection of anything that is not accepted by the woke, politically correct crowd, and people think that anything that happened before about 2015 is already of no relevance whatever. And it's tremendously important to actually turn to the ancient wisdom. And we indeed, the Torah, the community of Torah observers and Torah students, have the ancient wisdom. we have the oldest Kabbalistic text, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is traditionally attributed to Abraham, our father, Avraham Avinu. Sefer Yetzirah, which contains secrets of creation that qualified scientists are declaring on clips that I've seen, that only now are they understanding how this ancient text contains such wisdom in understanding of the universe. We find this in mathematics. One of my favorite examples is in the Book of Kings, in the description of King Solomon's temple, where there's description of the pool, the Yam Shlomo, the Sea of Solomon, within the temple courtyard, this circular pool in which the priests were able to immerse to purify themselves. And the text tells us that it was 30 cubits in its circumference and 10 cubits across. And there is a textual nuance which I've discussed in an article available on my site, letterfromjerusalem.com, a nuance that implies that King Solomon and the wise men of his era knew the exact value of pi, which is normally approximately 3.14 down to many, many tiny decimal points, tiny incredible figure. Go to the article there to see what we are talking about, the superior knowledge of the ancients in mathematics, and this is obvious also from Assyrian and from Egyptian culture, Babylonian culture, and so on. We're now coming to some of the very important quotes for our purpose. Einstein said that he was not an atheist. He had a reputation for being such, but he says, I am not an atheist. The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. We're in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows somebody must have written those books. I personally find this extremely interesting as a student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslau, because one of the most important teachings in his work, Likutei Moharan, is teaching 20 in the first part, which is a teaching about how Torah ideas come down into the world through a soul that goes through tremendous suffering. And there is associated vision, a vision that Rabbi Nachman had associated with that teaching, which is printed in the work called in English Tzaddik, Chayei Moharan. And after a tremendously crazy phantasmagorical dream, eventually to find the solution to all this, which is all bound up with the mystery of the beard, the mystery of the celestial beard, the dreamer finds himself in this vast library with scrolls and scrolls, endless scrolls and scrolls. And so it's appropriate for an intellectual to think, perhaps a professor of physics, to think of a vast library full of volumes and come to the conclusion somebody must have written this. But for the Torah and for the Kabbalah, there's something more fundamental and simple that does not require intellect. As we had in the reading of the Haftarah in the portion we read yesterday, the Haftarah of Et Hanan Nahamu Nahamu Ami from Isaiah chapter 40, where the prophet says, raise your eyes above and see who created these stars, these constellations, who created all this. That is to say, the important point and the fundamental pillar of all of the Kabbalah and all of the Torah, all of the 613 commandments is summed up in one word, and that is emunah. Emunah, translated with very great inaccuracy by the word of faith or belief, is more than that. It is absolute endorsement with my whole being that there is a creator because I did not create myself, and it's inconceivable that any of us created this universe that we see, and there's just too many coincidences and too many wonderful, amazing things to believe that there's not one divine mind behind all of this. This is Emunah. Emunah is the mystery that, yes, we do not know, we do not understand, but we accept there is a single master and ruler of the whole system. And this was precisely the concept that was being rejected in the hundreds of years running up to the birth of Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein lived after the French Revolution and after the rejection of many of the monarchs of Europe and the overthrow of many traditional governments. Likewise, he lived through the Russian Revolution and the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and its replacement with the communist regime. And the overthrow of rulers indicates that people don't agree that there's one ruler over their country, over their state, but it signals something deeper, the overthrow of a willingness to accept authority. Kabbalah is all about accepting authority, not the authority of flesh and blood, but the authority of the word of God as brought down by the prophets, men of supreme purity and holiness. And when we have emunah, not only in the fact that there must be a creator as we look up and say, who created all of this? But also through the words of the prophets and through the words of the teacher, we're able to refine our emunah to have a deeper understanding of what it is that we believe in. And all this had been thrown away by the intellectuals of the age of reason of the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s. And indeed, Einstein was not a respecter of authority automatically accorded to elders because he actually overthrew the system. He revolutionized Newtonian physics. It was never the same afterwards. But in the Kabbalah, it is not human theorists and speculators that we are bowing to, but we are internalizing the concepts that the prophets and the Kabbalists and the sages of Israel have given us in order to gain some kind of faint conception of what is ultimately inconceivable. So Einstein did not have this upbringing. It's questionable if he ever had any real exposure to either Kabbalah or Chassidut. So continuing with his words now, he tells us that anybody who thinks he was an atheist did not understand it, did not understand his theories. And now let's get down to the nitty-gritty of all this and allusion to all these theories. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. Well, now, that may be so in the physical and the material world, but the very concept that energy cannot be created or destroyed seems to contradict a very basic tenet of the Kabbalah, that the entire creation is yesh mi'ayin, it is yesh, substance, material, out of nothingness in the sense of nothing that we can conceptualize. The infinite source of this yesh, of this mamash, of this palpable reality is something totally beyond our ability to conceive of. And this is the so this is the palpable material world. But the Kabbalah is telling us that this is a creation out of nothing. That is to say, out of the inconceivable came mamash, as discussed in the Kabbalistic text of how through the contractions of the divine light, the infinite light, gradations from level to level, there came a world that is inhabitable by finite beings. But, says the Kabbalah, it is within the power of God to destroy the world in a nanosecond, in a trice, because the moment that the divine breath were withdrawn, if it were withdrawn, chas v'shalom, from the universe, you would be gone. And so this statement that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, the Kabbalah is saying, yes, that energy is a creation, and yes, it can be destroyed according to Kabbalah. However, within the system that God has created, within the parameters of the creation, the laws of nature that the Creator's set down for His purposes, it will be true that the laws of nature cannot be changed. You cannot change gravity or other laws of nature so easily through physical methods. So continuing with his sayings, everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Well, thank you very much. It may be that everything is energy, but we'd be grateful if you tell us more about the different kinds of energy that exist and their influence on one another. He tells us, if you match the frequency of the reality you want, you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy, this is physics. Concerning matter, we've all been wrong. What we've called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. Matter is spirit reduced to the point of visibility. There is no matter. Well, now, here we have some concepts that are very different from those of the Kabbalah. First of all, when he speaks about matter, I'm assuming he's talking about the physical world around us, the palpable world of tables and chairs and stones and trees and water and so on. And he's saying, look, as far as I'm concerned, it's all energy, and tune in at whichever level you want, you'll get that reality. Well, again, there are many, many levels of reality that we're all discovering cannot be seen visually, but our telephones are picking them up and translating them into visual and audio messages that we can interpret. There's all kinds of stuff buzzing around us, not to speak about all of the demons and devils that the early Kabbalistic leaders would speak about, those created by the sins of people, that are the things that tip over things in houses and break vases and cause other kinds of havoc and destruction. Heaven alone knows the forces that cause car accidents and so on. Everybody was supposedly going in a straight line. Many, many things are happening in the world, and to call them all energy does not help us very much. Because there is the material world, but clearly we live de facto in worlds that have dimensions of importance like emotion and like understanding and wisdom and feelings and desires and plans and hopes and aspirations that cannot be quantified. In fact, that science has signally failed to be able to either quantify or interpret or understand. So here, when Einstein tells us that concerning matter we've all been wrong, what we've called matter is all energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. Matter, he says, is spirit reduced to the point of visibility. There is no matter. Well, here, let's look at this paragraph I just read a little more closely, because here there is a very, very important common factor with the Kabbalah. Concerning matter, this visual world, we've all been wrong. Well, certainly the British philosophers that I was brought up with in my youth, in my student days, the so-called logical positivists, with retrospect, were totally wrong when they said that the world is simply made of physical matter, and if you think you have a mind and a soul, that's nothing more than the ghost in the machine. So Einstein says, well, what we've called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. Matter is spirit reduced to the point of visibility. There is no matter. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. Physical concepts are free creations of the human mind and are not, however it may seem, determined by the external world. Well, now, looking at this from the point of Kabbalah, there is one very important common factor, and that is this concept of the winding down of energy to levels that we live with. This the whole basis of the Kabbalah, the beginning of the Kabbalah, is that the God in himself is totally beyond all comprehension, beyond all understanding, beyond all, no understanding whatever. And the first act of creation is known as the tzimtzum, the contraction, the condensation of the light that becomes withdrawn from the point of view of the creation that will take shape. The divine light is withdrawn and it's within that space known as the Halal Apanui, the vacated space, vacated from the vacuumed out infinity. It's within this finite space that a theater, a stage is set for humanity with our challenges of good and evil created by this finite realm that God has brought into being. So the act of tzimtzum would correspond with the words of Einstein here, where he talks about how the what we call matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. And the concept of vibration is also very, very bound up with the Kabbalah, because the Kabbalah tells us that the levels of the Sefer Torah are four. They are the letters, the crowns over the letters, both of which are written in the Sefer Torah. And by oral tradition, we have the vowels, the nekudot. And top level of all are the Ta'amei HaMikra, the notes of the cantillation of the Torah and the Bible. Those two levels, the vowels and the notes of cantillation, are given down by the oral tradition coming down to us from Mount Sinai. And sound is all about vibrations. It's all about vibrations, and you can find this concept of the vibrations that where the energy has been lowered, the vibration of the energy has been so lowered to be a point where it's perceptible to the senses. All of this is the concept in Kabbalah of the gradation from the supreme divine midot, the divine attributes which are manifested through his works, and as they are filtered down level by level, like an electric grid of a country, where if you put plugged your things directly into the national grid, they blow up everything in a trice. But when you have the power graded down to your ability to use it, your electoral instruments to use it, then we have a world that is on our level. So now when he says that reality, after all this bringing down of the vibrations to our level, when he calls it an illusion, well, maybe it is an illusion, albeit a very persistent illusion. Well, we certainly live with this illusion of reality day and night, don't we? I mean, with our tables and chairs and beds and kitchens and so on and so forth, our cars and our roads and our work, our offices, our shops and everything else. We live in this illusion, and many people never get beyond the externality of the illusion. But the person of Emunah is all the time saying, well, who made this? Who brought this into being? How do I connect with you? And this is the foundation of prayer and devotion, which Einstein probably did not have per se, although he was certainly had mystical tendencies. But whether he had an actual routine of devotions, I would say is very, very doubtful. So when he says that it's an illusion, it's a very powerful illusion. And we could say that it's an illusion that actually the Creator has created for us Of course, physics cannot tell us what is beyond this physical world. Physics gives us no information about what happens after the bubble bursts, after the dream, we wake up from the dream. But Kabbalah and Chassidut have a lot to say about this. The whole concept of relativity is brought out very interestingly in a teaching of Rabbi Nachman, where he says how a person may, in a dream, think that they've gone through 70 years, where in fact, when they wake up, it's been a quarter of an hour. And yet in the dream state of consciousness, which is a very low, a limited state of consciousness governed by what is called the koach amadameh, the imaginative mind, the time seems to have passed so slowly. Now, he writes there that if a person attains a great level of sechel, a great level of wisdom, all of the time of this world in this life disappears into nothing in relation to the enormous spans of time in the creation. And so here we do have concepts of the relativity of time depending on the level at which you are at. Now again, I do admit that I know nothing about the real truth of the theory of relativity, but I do know the meaning of the word relative, and one can find in Hasidic writings many ways of discussing how this world is actually a place of mutedness. It is a place which to us is one of mamash. But it's not that God has vacuumed out his infinity entirely. He's here all the time, only that is what he has hidden from us. Through nature, through hateva, God has hidden the supreme force that is bringing everything into being. Indeed, nature, our bodies, curtail the ability to experience the light that is actually present all the time. And the whole pathway of Chassidus and Kabbalah is that to the extent that we're able to nullify the gravitational pull of the body, we release the mind and the soul to come to higher apprehensions. So now, if reality is an illusion, albeit persistent, it seems to be that way because God wanted it that way to present us in this world with a place of challenge, so that we have to deal with embracing good and rejecting evil in order to attain to a higher world, which Albert Einstein, the physicist, could not understand through any kind of rationality if he had any concept mystically of this higher world. So in saying that physical concepts are free creations of the human mind and are not, however it may seem, determined by the external world, I take it that means that if you have a table in front of you, or you see a table, that actually what is out there in the, as it were, substrate of the material world that's seen by the physicist, it's your mind that is constructing this picture that you have of the table. And that this picture you have is not determined by the external world. Well, now, Kabbalah would put this rather differently, that the constructs and the concepts in our minds have been planted there essentially by the Creator in order that we may interpret the world around us that He's put us in, that it is the concepts of our minds that certainly relate to the creatures of the world around us, because both have been created by the Creator. It's not that we of our own volition have created these concepts. We find in Genesis, after the creation of man, that God brings before him the various creatures, and Adam gives each one the name of that creature, the Hebrew name, which is the source of the vitality of that particular species, and that is what that species is. So how did Adam do this? Because he had this wisdom of the Torah, which was given him as a gift before the sin when he descended spiritually into lower realms. So to say that the physical concepts are free creations of the human mind are not they are not determined by the external world is something that is very simplistic from a Kabbalistic point of view. And even more so, time and space are not conditions in which we live, but modes in which we think. Well, now, turning to the Sefer Yetzirah, the foundational source of the Kabbalah attributed to Avraham Avinu, Abraham the patriarch, on the basis of his speculations and his searches, Sefer Yetzirah begins with the concept of the three permutations of the Hebrew root Sefer, Safar, Saper, the book itself, the number, and the story that is being told by the book through the numbers. And these Kabbalistically are explained as the three fundamental coordinates of our creation, which are space, time, and soul. In the words of the Sefer Yetzirah, Olam, universe, world, space, Shana, year, time, and Nefesh, the living people, the living inhabitants of this creation of space and time. The very word Olam comes from the Hebrew word of concealment, the concept of ne'elam, something has been hidden. That is to say that the Olam, the creation, came into being through the concealment from the creations of the divine light. It is for us muted. For God there's no change. In darkness and light God is one. But for his creation, in order that we should be able to stand the intensity, God has kindly and mercifully muted the intensity of his light level by level and let us grow like plants rising towards the light. And so to say that time does not exist is a flagrant contradiction to the Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah, because the Sefer Yetzirah, it was through these three books, space, time, and soul, that the whole universe was brought into being. It may be from the point of view that of the physicist that yesterday to today and tomorrow are of no significance. There's no difference between them. As he says, time does not exist. We invented it. Time is what the clock says. The distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Well, now, Kabbalistically, of course, indeed, God is totally above past, present, and future. Hoyo, hoive, yihye. Those are the permutations of the Tetragrammaton, one who brings everything into being, Hoyo, hoive, and yihye. And it was his will that there would be time. The Torah begins with time, the first day, the second day, the third day of creation. The Sabbath counts 7 weeks, 7 years to the Jubilee and so on. The Torah is all about time and how we relate both to time and to space, the land of Israel, the other lands, their relationship with each other, and what we are doing in this time and space. But the physicist cannot discern any of this because the physicist only has eyes for the material world and cannot at all deal with concepts of human purpose, human goals, human plans, the execution of plans. Human action is an area where science has shown itself to be entirely lacking in its ability to quantify, to assess qualitatively, extremely primitive. Now, let's come to our next quotation. A human being experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. A very amazing statement, and from the Kabbalistic perspective, a very, very interesting statement. Indeed, the whole concept of the contraction of God's infinite light and the bringing into being of this halal panui, the vacated space in which God's presence is invisible to the inhabitants, here we already have the first concept of separation. Before the Tzimtzum, there was no separation. Everything was absorbed in the infinity of everything. But the moment there is a separate realm where the light is muted or vacuumed out, become invisible, there's already I and thou, because we in the created world have art. Who has made all this? Who's created this? I and thou, me and God. So already a separation, and certainly from earliest babyhood, from the day of birth, we certainly all have our independent egos, and every one of us knows instinctively that I am the center of everything, do we not? And so, and we are separate from the others because they don't do exactly what we want all the time. They don't all the time do according to our will. They seem to have independent wills that may go against our will. There were some of the 17th century British philosophers who said, look, everything's an optical illusion. It's all a delusion of consciousness, and you are nothing but figments of my imagination. A very offensive concept. Yes, God has created separateness. He created man as one, and yet then he separated the two aspects of man, Zachar and Nekeva. Adam was split into Zachar, male, and Nekeva, the female, and already a division came into the world, Ezer, Kenegdai, a helper against him. And so it is with the whole development of history that we're constantly seeing that actually the creation lives off diversity and opposites and competition. That's how things advance. I mean, even the completely materialist evolutionists claim that there's the will to survive. That is the key, according to them, to their speculative theory of evolution. But clearly we see that everything is separate, and indeed the whole spiritual journey is to remove this separateness, as Albert Einstein said, but in with a slightly different nuance. Here is an important difference between the philosophy of the Torah, where, yes, the delusion of separateness is a kind of prison, restricting us to our personal desires, to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Well, what do you mean by embracing? Exactly what do you mean by embracing everything, the whole of nature? Because the Torah introduces differences and discriminations within nature that are not apparent to the eye of the physical scientist, the physicist, the chemist, or the biologist. It may be that from the physical point of view, the flesh of swine has many similarities to the flesh of a lamb or a calf. However, from the spiritual point of view, the Torah has told us that there's a great difference that will come into a person's life if he ingests this flesh of swine. And this is not at all evident to the scientists. So the Torah certainly does not tell us to widen our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures. The Torah teaches us to discriminate, to make separations between what we may embrace and what we must not embrace. On all levels, there are people whose actions qualify them for being rejected by society to the point where certain criminals and sinners have done something that is so contrary to God's creation that they need to be eliminated from the creation as a law of the Torah. And this itself is the true compassion, because the compassion on the majority is when you remove the evil from their midst. And having compassion on the wicked is cruelty to the righteous, as our sages have said. So we do not embrace all and everything in creation. We certainly must stand in awe of everything. And in his closing words in this quotation, to embrace the whole of nature in its beauty, will certainly to stand before nature with awe, and the awe should be the awe of the Creator who made this, and the respect for his laws, not to wantonly damage, not to wantonly destroy. So yes, our separation from each other may be an optical illusion, but it's very important to us in the way we actually live. And that's why the central commandment of the Torah, when we feel we are separated from somebody else, we have to love them as ourself. V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself, where the connotations of this word re'acho, your fellow, could be actually love what you perceive in front of you, which is your evil, your ra. You see in that person evil, you want to hate that person. Understand that what you see there is actually a projection of your own flaws. And so learn in your interactions with others, not just to embrace everybody, I love you all, shalom, 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 but to work interactively in order to build both ourselves and the others to the extent that we can. So now coming towards the later part of our discussion, here a very, very beautiful quote from Albert Einstein that I think could really come straight out of Chassidut in modern language. We are souls dressed up in sacred biochemical garments, and our bodies are the instruments through which our souls play their music. Well, if Reb Nachman had used the word biochemical garments of the body, then he might have made this statement. Indeed, the whole of Reb Nachman's Chassidut is to discover the soul within this body, within this constricted world that we live in, to purify ourselves until we really do bring out the soul and begin to play through our body with the divine symphony going on all around us. So very much so. But the next statement, Reb Nachman, I think, would totally disagree with, and that is when Einstein says everything is determined, every beginning and ending, by forces over which we have no control. It is determined for the insect as well as for the star, human beings, vegetables, or cosmic dust. We all dance to a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. The contradiction between the sense that God created everything and created us and all of our faculties and our powers and even our free will. This seems to contradict the idea that we do have free will. The question so many ask is, if we have free will, how can it be that we are taught that God knows what we are going to do? What kind of free will is this? It would appear that already what we're going to do is predetermined. Well, now, Reb Nachman emphasized that as long before him, some 600 years before Reb Nachman came along, Maimonides, Rambam writes in the Laws of Repentance that the contradiction apparently between God's knowing what we're going to do and our free will is one that cannot be understood as long as we are in this world. Our minds are not built to understand this. As Reb Nachman explains, if we could understand this, we'd no longer be human beings in this world, we'd be angels above this world. So we can't resolve that contradiction, but the whole Torah is given to us on the premise that we have free will. Now, of course, our circumstances and our surroundings are limited and determine many aspects of our bodies, our social environment, our upbringing, our education, the resources available to us, and many other factors all influence. But the Torah emphasizes that for all of that, we are constantly coming to crossroads where we have to choose between this direction or that direction. And in that sense, that is where we have our free will within the parameters of our existence. Our ability to make those choices is something that we all feel. We want to raise our hand, we raise it. God help us that we should be able to do this. And so the Kabbalah and Chassidut would emphatically disagree with the idea that everything is determined, every beginning and ended. Certainly, we believe that God has brought about this creation with a plan and with a goal. And the goal is to come to the complete perfection of God's love for all of his creations. That everybody should have it. Nobody should lose out. Even the wicked will be released ultimately from hell, except for those who are totally destroyed forever, who cannot be part of perfection ever. But the whole of creation is going towards this ultimate end, this ultimate goal. And we don't have ultimate control. We do have free will, but even with our free will, God, the master chess player that we are constantly playing against, always is so many moves ahead of us and knows how to bring us to his intended goal. So there is determination, but we do have free will, but ultimately we're all dancing to a mysterious tune, intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. Well, the piper, the tune is coming from where it's coming. You have to study the writings of Reb Nachman of Breslov and of the Kabbalah to understand how all of these levels of the divine government of the universe are coming down through the levels of the four aspects of the Torah text, the notes of the cantillation, the top level, the music, and the vowels, the soul of the letters, the crowns and the physical letters themselves. And when we, the people, begin to live our lives according to those words and letters of the Torah, then our bodies are the letters through which we are playing out this song, which is being brought down to us from our souls through the level of our spirit, our ruach, which is the level of the vowels which give animation to the body. The spirit is enclosed in the pulses of our body, and these are cognates of the pulses of our soul. So the entire cosmic melody is coming down, as so beautifully described by Reb Nachman, particularly in his last testament to the world, Likutei Moharan, Part 2, Teaching 8. So yes, it's all music. We're dancing to this mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. There's also a very beautiful saying brought down by Reb Nachman that we're all pens in the hands of the scribe. There is the scribe. We are all being moved by this invisible hand of God, bringing everything out to its proper end. So now as we draw to a conclusion, let us look at some of the closing quotations that we have here. When you examine the lives of the most influential people who have ever walked among us, you discover one thread that winds through them all. They've aligned first with their spiritual nature, and only then with their physical selves. The true value of a human being can be found in the degree to which he has attained liberation from the self. I am happy because I want nothing from anyone. I don't care about money, decorations, titles, or distinctions mean nothing to me. I don't crave praise. I claim credit for nothing. A happy man is too satisfied with the present to dwell too much on the future. Well, indeed, certainly from the point of view of the Kabbalah and Chassidut, it is most definitely the case that the people who truly achieve something in this world are those who have been liberated from the physical self, from the physical ego, from the attachment to eating and drinking and physical pleasure and prestige and glory and power and so on. The true tzaddikim, as we would express it in the language of Torah, Kabbalah and Chassidut, the Chassidim and Tzaddikim, the Tzaddik, the righteous, the purified, the Chassid, one who goes beyond the letter of the law, one who attempts to purify him or herself. So they are aligned with their spiritual nature, and the expression of their physicality comes from their spirituality. When they sit down to the Shabbat feast, and where the foods and the courses are bringing the physical oneg, the physical joy that is elevating the spiritual joy of this moment of the Shabbat meal. So certainly those who are liberated from the lower self, from what the Chassidut would call the animal self, are those who are going to have a happy life, because the liberation from the self is the ultimate goal of Kabbalah and Chassidut, to attain a level of what is called bitul, one of self-nullification. And I believe that this is an essential connection between what the Kabbalah and Chassidut and the path of Musar, of self-elevation, are teaching, and this idea that is being expressed here by Albert Einstein. These are very important ideas, but what is lacking for the scientists is what Kabbalah and Chassidut provide us with, and that is the pathway to this liberation. The liberation begins with the basic understanding, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeitsicho me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeis avodim. I am the Lord your God that took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. It is through the submission to the authority of the unknown, invisible God who has revealed his wisdom to us through the Torah, to our submission to the Torah, our true submission, literally facing ourselves with naked honesty in our introspection and attuning our lives to the melody of the Torah. This is how we attain the liberation. We are enhanced in our consciousness, in our wisdom, and in our awe and love of the Creator. So my friends, I think that there's a great deal that we can learn from this outstanding genius of the 20th century, Albert Einstein, who was a lover of Israel and a lover of God in his way, who stood in tremendous awe at the mysteries of the creation with true humility. So may you have Shavuot Tov V'Vorach, a good and a blessed week. And with that, we conclude our discussion for today.